Now, my name is Schikan, CEO of Prosensa, as was mentioned already, and we are a private company, but I want to make a forward-looking statement, which is the following, that we will be presenting later this afternoon, quite far away from here actually, in Cold Spring Harbor, some very interesting data on our ongoing developments in the Duchenne space. So I will not be talking about data in this session. I will be talking about the rare disease space and what partnerships can bring there. So that's the topic of my presentation. But for those of you who had hoped that I would talk about data, I'm more than willing after this presentation to talk to you on a one-on-one basis. So the highlights of Prosensa as a company: the company was founded back in 2002. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary. It's a rare disease company. 85 motivated, passionate staff working every day the talk, trying to find treatments for rare diseases. We have 6 identified compounds for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, 3 compounds in the clinic already, a lead compound in phase 3 together with GSK, key partnership with them for a selected part of the DMD franchise, so we kept a lot of rights to ourselves, and a platform called RNA modulation, which can be applied not only to rare, but also to more common diseases. And for those of you who do not know Duchenne muscular dystrophy, here you see the typical pattern of the disease. It starts with walking problems. Boys, it's an X-linked disease, will be wheelchair-bound by the age of 10, 12, limited use of arms, the necessity of ventilation, and very few of these young men will survive the age of 30. It's a devastating, rare neuromuscular disorder, and that is because a certain protein in the muscles called dystrophin is lacking. And dystrophin you could see as a shock absorber. A shock absorber in the muscles that if it works, your muscles will be okay. If you don't have that shock absorber, then your muscles will become inflammatory, fibrotic, and fatty. The gene which codes for this protein, this shock-absorbing protein, happens to be the longest gene in the human body. It has 79 building blocks called exons, and if something goes wrong in that gene, then the protein will not be working correctly. Have a close look at number 50, axon number 50. If there is a deletion at that place, then you see that the reading frame from 49 to 51 is not working. What we then do, by introducing a so-called antisense oligonucleotide, in this case Pro51, going to the axon next to the deleted one, we mask that axon as an intron, and the reading frame is restored again. So we make a shorter protein, and we assume that will be a functional protein. And we can do that anywhere in that gene, 44, 53, 55, and so on. And that's why we currently have a portfolio of 6 identified compounds in various stages of development, plus a 7th program called Prospect to look at the more rare deletions as well, whereby we eventually hope to treat as many Duchenne patients as possible. We also work on myotonic and Huntington. So instead of what many companies do, to try to develop one medicine into new indications, we go the hard way. We make more medicines for one disease, and that's really called personalized medicine. And that's why we could go into a partnership on that pipeline in a way that one disease was divided between GSK as our partner and ourselves. And here you see that overview. GSK has a license on Pro51, the lead compound, applicable to the largest patient population, about 13%. And then they have options on a few other compounds. But it's quite a complex deal because we also have, again, opt-in rights to some of the compounds which they licensed or which they would license in the future. So in that way, we have kept more rights to ourselves than we have licensed to GSK. And I often get the question, would you do it again? Would you partner with a big pharma company like GSK again? And I hope to give you the answer at the end of this session. I will not come directly. Now, the point is, in the rare disease space, uniquely, biotech companies do not have to partner because you do not need huge infrastructures to bring the final fruits of your R&D to patients or physicians. It's uniquely designed that with small forces, I wouldn't call them sales forces, but let's say medical, patient liaison forces, you can bring these products to patients. So you don't need a big infrastructure. Why then still partner? To partner or not to partner? That's the question. And Just to go back in history, if you go back to 1943, then Thomas Watson, the founder of IBM, he said there may be a total need of 4 to 5 computers in the world. So the question he had at that moment, is there really a market for computers? And he would say no. If we go a little bit further back in time to 1885, then Lord Kelvin, the president of the Royal Society, he said, radio has no future. Flying machines are impossible. So what all these people really would have liked to have had is a crystal ball to look into the future and to decide, should I make these statements or not? Should I partner or should I not partner? And being a Dutchman coming from the Netherlands, I'd like to show you in my presentation a couple of slides of a very famous Dutch artist. And he's right here. If you look in the crystal ball, you'll see him there. And his name is Maurits Cornelis Escher. He lived until 1972, and he was a Dutch graphic artist. So you'll see a couple of slides coming back, and I say they are quite remarkably applicable to the collaboration which we have with GSK. It all started back in 2009. October 2009, after about 9 months of negotiations, we signed a partnership with GSK. It was announced, we all were very happy, and we got emails actually from patient organizations saying this is the best thing happening in this rare disease space, that now companies like GSK are also interested and committed to helping rare disease patients. Because traditionally, it were companies like Genzyme, Biomarin, Shire. I myself come from Genzyme, so those companies were always working in the space. But nowadays, Novartis, Pfizer, GSK. It's a great moment for patients to see that as a real long-term commitment by larger companies to help to solve rare diseases. But then when you sign an agreement, you have to make sure that the DNA helix is applied to the companies, that you really are thinking as one. So it's all about trust, integrity, and commitment. Those were the values we were looking for when we decided to enter into the partnership with GSK. We had a couple of options at that moment, but we decided for GSK eventually. And here you see one of these famous pictures by Escher, where if you look very carefully, you see some land in the bottom there, and then you see white birds going to the right, and those white birds become black birds going to the left. And that could be the situation. Prosensa could be interested to fly to the right, and GSK could be interested to do something totally different. For example, when it is about developing compounds in a certain way. So that's not the kind of situation we would like to have in a partnership between small biotech and big pharma. The minds have to be alike there. Even worse, suppose that GSK wants to swim nicely forward, and we want to go faster and fly towards the goal. That's a situation which is not uncommon if you have partnerships between small biotech and large pharma. We found the solution there. We teach the fish how to fly. And that's really what we have done so far. And I have to say that, really to the credit of GSK, when we signed the deal back in 2009, I got a phone call from Patrick Valens, head of R&D, saying, Hans, you have all this experience, which was very limited, by the way, from Genzyme. How should we organize this? And GSK really gave us the impression that they listened to us throughout this journey of bringing treatments to patients. And this allows me for a quick commercial in between, if you allow me, because I have a book here. It's the book you see there. It's the book called Rare Diseases. Now you might say, why is Hans using this forum to make advertisement for a book here? Well, the royalties of this book will go to rare disease charities. And the book actually was an initiative by Nick Serow. You see his picture here. Nick is the father of 2 sons who both have AKU, alkaptonuria, or black bone disease. And he was in a very similar situation as you in the back who asked the question just a moment ago. I have a product, there is a disease, how do I bring it forward? And Nick is a social entrepreneur par excellence. He really has been trying to find the company which would have a drug. He found funding, he found physicians, And for the book, he found a number of people, including myself, who gave him a few weekends to write this book. And when I said yes, because it's going to rare disease charities, I did not know how difficult it would be to write a book. So if you ever get that question, believe me, then think twice, because it's going to be in it. But the nice thing about it as well, that in this conference, you actually can get it free of charge by this CRO called PSR. So they have a booth in the exhibition room. And maybe they don't have enough for all of you, but then they'll make sure they order one. So, and again, keep in mind, the royalties go to rare disease charities. Back to the fishbowl. Living apart together is the statement I would like to make here. Yes, there is a big GSK house in London. They have big research facilities in Stevenage and all over the UK. We have a small lab and facility in Leiden in the Netherlands, and we really had to work together. So communication is the key element here. We are in almost daily contact through various channels with our partner. We are flying back and forth to the UK on a regular basis, and people are in joint project teams, joint steering committees, and so on. So we really are part of the development. And that's a major element, I would say, of the success of this collaboration. It's not that the small biotech Prosensa license it all to a big pharma company and then goes on with the next development. We are actively participating in the development as well, and some of our people in the company are actually being paid for by GSK. Then we have a few challenges. Where we have a common ground between Prosensa and GSK is that we are trying in a very integral and committed way to do what's best for patients. But very often, that same symbol does then have a shadow of a dollar sign. That's very often how people appreciate it, that pharma companies are there to make a buck. And that's, of course, one of the elements why innovation does occur, but it should not be the primary perception. Unfortunately, that is often the case. And I'll give you a few examples. On the moment that in the rare disease space, we talk about newborn screening, or about creating disease awareness, informing patients, or establishing registries, those who think negatively about that could easily see that as promotion and talk about newborn screening. That's about enlarging your market and raising your revenues. Creating disease awareness is about more revenues. Informing patients, that's promotion. And establishing registries is about lining up patients to get to development. So it's very important in the way how we communicate. And there have been some penalties paid in the past. Look, for example, here is overview, BP ranks #1, but unfortunately, the other companies are all pharma companies which were fined by the American Department of Justice at fines for GSK 3 billion, Pfizer 2.3 billion, for things which happened a long time ago in a different era. But we, working with GSK, are still seeing that. So what you see traditionally, typically in a space then, is to prevent by all means that information might be interpreted or perceived as promotion, then rather let's not talk. And that's in a situation, in an era where, as Wendy was saying, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn are abundantly available. That's not of this time anymore. So communication with patients, which is so inherently connected to the rare disease space, is not really in line with how big pharma currently can communicate, certainly not in Europe, with patients. And that's where elements like scientific engagement policies come up. You can find this on the internet. I urge you to have a look at it, because it does explain why companies like GSK are just far more conservative in talking about, for example, results of studies, or indeed going out with information which might be perceived as promotion. And especially in the rare disease space, where patients are sometimes so difficult to diagnose or to find, it's of key importance that communication is ranking #1. After all, late or misdiagnosis occurs in many different cases. From my Genzyme days, I know that for Gaucher, Fabry, and Pompe, around 70 to 80% of patients were wrongly diagnosed. Or the time lag from the first visit to a physician to the actual diagnosis. For Duchenne, it's fairly short, 2 to 3 years. but for Gaucher, 4 to 13 years, for Fabry, 16 years. So you really talk about a long time that a rare but devastating disease can continue to damage before a patient will get to treatment. And that's why communication, disease awareness, newborn screening, all these elements are so crucially important. And that's why when I say that shaping the rare disease space is key, and a different approach is needed in comparison to common diseases, and being actively engaged in a small community is mandatory, then I often hear from big pharma companies, yes, but there is a scientific engagement policy. Yes, we have to be careful not to be misperceived by the regulators. And I would like to make a plea here that we try to find solutions in a way that rare disease companies can carve out a space in that way that patient benefit comes first with the right communication. Because the rare disease community is a very small community. It's very intimate. And I'll give you an example. The presentation, which will take place this afternoon in Cold Spring Harbor on our data, was taken up in an abstract book just 2 days ago. I think within 1 hour after the abstract book came out, it was all over the place on patient blogs already. So it shows that patients are really following the space very, very closely, and rightfully so, because they really want to know what's happening there. Patients as partners is key, both for GSK and for us, absolutely. And we both agree that talking about patients is good, but talking with patients is far better. But here again, we have to be careful. Every single sentence, every single word, I would say every single syllable which we are bringing out in a conference, in a press release, in an article, will be weighted by patients, and they'll try to derive hope from that. What does this mean for my kid? When will they come to treatment? When will they file? All these things are of key importance for patients, and rightfully so, but as a company you have to be extremely careful in not over-promising and really trying to be cautious. I would say even more cautious than what you would do in big pharma. Because let's face it, if we want to give information, information is often translated into hope. Hope for my kid, hope for myself. When we talk about an investigational compound still under development, then many patients will see that as a medicine. When we talk about a clinical trial, they'll see it often as a treatment. And when we talk about a treatment, they will often see it as a cure. You might say, what's in these words? But as a company in the rare disease space, I think we bear an extra responsibility to be extraordinarily cautious in communication when it comes to patients. And here's an example. You might be able to read it in the back, but it's coming from parents of a kid with Duchenne. And these are the kind of emails which we get on a weekly basis. This morning one came in again. And they go directly to our dedicated patient advocacy person, and it goes directly to the chief medical officer to answer all these letters. We get letters from all over the world of patients who have picked up a press release, who have picked up an abstract from a conference in Cold Spring Harbor, asking, what can you do for my son? Going back to the partnership and some of the struggles, decision-making. Again, this is a picture of Asher, and Asher is known since he made these drawings where you really can't see is this up or down or how is this going. But sometimes I have the feeling as well when I look at all the SOPs and all the structures and organizations and all the system steps which we have to go through with a big company. It can take a while to come to decisions. And sometimes you don't really know whether you have to go there or there, and in the end you'll still end up in the same place. So very often we feel that we are walking in circles without decisions. But what we don't see is that behind those scenes a very robust process is ongoing and many people are consulted. After all, big pharma is like this. It's moving slowly, it takes a while to move the ship, whereas we, as small biotech, are more in this space. We want to move fast. We want to turn the boat around. And if we don't think that's good, then we go the other way. Thanks to the partnership with GSK, and I say that from the bottom of my heart, we never would have been able as Prosensa to come to the largest program ever in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. with more than 300 patients in fully enrolled or already completed studies. Clinical trials which are ongoing in more than 50 trial sites in 25 countries on 5 continents, from the US to Australia, from Norway to Japan. And the R&D pipeline, which when we started the collaboration with GSK only consisted of 2 compounds for Duchenne, today has 6 identified compounds, 1 other program, and 2 in other diseases. The broadest portfolio ever in Duchenne right now to help as many patients as possible with exon skipping. This is us. We want to move fast. As soon as we have data, we want to go to the FDA and to the EMA, discuss it, file our products. However, this car can have more data. So it is, again, it's the balance between small biotech and big pharma. And it's a very constructive dialogue. And I tell you, we have those dialogues on a continuous basis. We want to move fast. GSK doesn't want to move slowly, not at all, but they want to do the right things for patients and to make sure that eventually the right thing will happen there. Pricing. Many people ask me, do you think that a company like GSK, or in the case of, for example, Sanofi acquiring Genzyme, that pricing can be the same for a big company like for a small biotech company? I think that we all are not suffering, we should be conscious of the fact that pricing in the rare disease space is in a spotlight. And this afternoon there will be a session as well about pricing in Europe from a European perspective. But too often it takes a while to explain to a payer or to anyone else why premium pricing is so applicable to this space. Does a larger company have it more difficult there? I don't think so. If I look at the way in which companies like GSK are really working on models to convince payers that you get value for the reimbursement or price you pay, that's far more than we ever could do as Prosensa. So pricing and reimbursement is really under a magnifying glass. And recently an article was written, and in the audience we have Ad Schuurman sitting right there. Ad, maybe you can just raise your hand that people can see you, because he's one of the authors of this article. And I really invite you to read it. Because rather than looking at the more traditional parameters like the rarity of a disease, the severity of a disease, and the impact which a potential treatment may have, those were normally the traditional ways to look at pricing and reimbursement, he and his peers wrote an article to look at a different way on pricing and reimbursement, whereby also, for example, the investments which a company has done will be taken into account, whereby one looks at alternatives. Are there more products available? Or is it really just an unmet medical need but nothing is there? I'm sure this will come back in the panel discussion later this afternoon, but I invite you to read this article. So the key question, to partner or not to partner? Here you see a few considerations. Big pharma traditionally has better development capabilities, better contacts with regulators. We talked about Dr. Katz, they talk about Rusty. Closer to payers. They will be with payers on a weekly basis. Manufacturing know-how and a huge commercial infrastructure. We think that we are more nimble when it comes to research and discovery. We think that we are closer to patients. They might not agree, but this morning only I had 5 emails with patient associations. We can make fairly quick decisions in a small biotech company, and we are quite entrepreneurial. And we have this continuous sense of urgency. So the question is then how to weigh these things. And as Shakespeare said, to be or not to be, in fact the question is also, when you decide as a small biotech company to partner, it's not about to be or not to be, it's about to become or not to become a fully integrated company. Do I really want to become a company with everything in there, manufacturing, discovery, development, and commercial? Or am I satisfied with developing leads, researching leads, give them to big pharma, and then move on to the next phase? To partner or not to partner? The answer, yes, absolutely. I would do it absolutely again, partner with GSK. Although there is a little but there. And the little but means, what have we learned in the last couple of years? How might we indeed maybe together do it differently? We are sitting always in the back of the car. GSK is mostly on the driver's seat. We're sitting in the back of the car, and they give us the impression that they listen to us, but not always, not always. And that's where, of course, the usual dilemmas occur. On the other hand, we strongly believe that we are the little boat there in the front, pulling big GSK through the narrow canals here. And when I presented this picture in the GSK audience, they said, no, 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 you see it wrong. These are not big ropes on the front there, and you are pulling that big ship called GSK. Those are iron bars, and we are pushing you forward. Okay, it's all about interpretation. Anyway, we call this real-true partnerships. Working together in the rare disease space, I think, is a key ingredient for success. Without it, Prosensa would not be where it is today. And I think without it, not many rare disease companies would have the successes they have today. And to close off with Asher, this is one of the most famous works of Asher. He made this metamorphosis, where it starts with metamorphosis, and if you then go through it, then finally it ends up with metamorphosis again. So in the end, it probably wouldn't make a difference, but I'll tell you, for Prosensa, for GSK, and most importantly, for patients affected by a rare disease like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, I'm convinced it does make a difference. Thank you.